Now let's hear viewpoints from both sides of the aisle. We welcome Austin Barbour and Brandon Jones to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and a former Democratic member of the Mississippi House. Welcome back, gentlemen. Good to see you.
Thank you. Happy summer.
Yeah, how about that? It feels great outside, doesn't it? All right, the legislature, they've just passed a budget, but Austin, how would you describe what we witnessed at the Capitol in that special session?
Process, doing their job, getting the budget done. Did it make everybody happy? No. Did they get done what they needed to get done in an appropriate way? Yes. Did they do it before the deadline? Yes. Were there frustrations that they had to come back and do it in a special session? Yes. Does that happen when you deal with the legislature? Yes. I don't think there was any big celebration. It's a budget. And obviously budgets are very important when you're talking about state agencies and roads and healthcare and education. Those things are really, really important. But they got it done. There was very little arguing. There was a little arguing. And they got their business done, and they were back home within 2 days. So again, nobody's having a party. But they finished the job, and they did it in an appropriate way. You're just ready.
I'm sure Brandon agrees with everything you said.
Brandon does not agree, but go ahead, Brandon.
That's the most whistle by the graveyard response. That's Captain Gaslight over here. No, it was
Captain Gaslight?
It was a mess. It was a mess.
What would Captain Gaslight look like?
The thing was a mess. The special session was not much of a spectator sport because there wasn't much to see.
Yeah, but it never is.
For the first time, I think, I do not know of a time in budget-making history, in modern history in Mississippi, where members of the body were not allowed to ask questions about what a bill had in it, and were not allowed to set aside a bill. In the House, they passed a motion that disallowed asking questions about the budget. And then you weren't allowed to set bills aside to say, let's give this one a special look because that number looks off to me, or I would like to ask for details about that number. And so the House seemed to be of the opinion that they got some type of award for finishing the fastest. They were there for 2 hours, they leave. They made terrible mistakes that would affect federal funding that we receive year over year based on how they handled the Department of Health budget. But yeah, it was a mess. It was a total mess. And it was preventable, and they can't get along. And there's no real great explanation for it.
I didn't listen to much of the House debate. I did listen to some.
There wasn't one.
Well, okay, when they were taking the bills up. But I did listen to the Senate side some, and I heard Briggs Hobson taking questions from the well. So
Senate side was different.
Okay, but I mean, I did hear. I don't know. Are you saying that the House changed the rules, or because I certainly heard no, we want the bill read, or no, I can't remember some of the parliamentary procedures that took place, but I know there was some of that. I wasn't sure exactly what you were referring to. Is there was no debate, no questions?
Jay, so the answer to your question, the short answer.
I'm not trying to pick a fight.
The short answer, no, I know. The short answer to your question is yeah. They did not allow conversation on these bills, whether in committee or on the floor. The speaker seemed to have a bee in his bonnet about something, and so he did something that's totally new in the history. Like I say, I do not know of this ever happening where members of the House were not allowed to ask the appropriations chair, the other appropriators for details of the bill. John Reed, he knows the process. He's been around this process. I'm assuming he was given instructions not to do it this way because he's certainly seen it done other ways.
I just didn't hear. I mean, John Reed is a fantastic appropriations chairman. He can handle a question for me. He's pretty daggum likable too.
And why they didn't do it this time
I didn't hear that, so I can't argue with you about that whole process. But listen, there's a lot of comments, and I'm sure you'll get to this about transparency, and there wasn't this and there wasn't that. But these budgets, I don't want to throw out a term because you'll try to hold it to me. 90%, 75%, 97% pretty much done coming out of the regular session. And as we all know, there are multiple appropriations committee hearings, subcommittee hearings that take place where all members are a part of that. Were there some changes that were made before the special session as the LG, the speaker, and the governor had to try to come to agreement? Of course. Were those 1% changes, 15% changes? I don't know. But I do know that the vast majority of the stuff, was debated and reviewed and discussed during the regular session.
It makes their posture even more inexplicable because, as you guys know, the way that the budget process works, it starts in the fall before the session begins. And that's when
that's a great point.
The state economist comes in and says, here's basically what your budget is. The governor will typically offer his budget. Yeah. And then the legislature will offer its budget recommendations. And so really for the most part in November, the numbers that you're working with. Now, those numbers change somewhat, but they typically do. That part is not. So that's another part that kind of makes this inexplicable because you do have a runway here that's a little bit longer than you have for some general bills. You kind of know going in what the parameters are. The fact that it was a special session is not unprecedented.
That's right.
It's not unprecedented to take care of business outside of the regular session. I think the fact that they got called back in, they did it so the House acted so swiftly. They didn't want to talk about it. Is just very telling. And it had the ring of petulance to me, Wilson. I think if I was to be totally honest with our listeners from an outsider's perspective, we've got a speaker who had to twist a lot of arms to accomplish his audacious policy goals this year, including with some Democrats.
Bodacious?
Audacious.
Bodacious.
And so in making those deals, look, folks were offered special projects. They were told X amount of money's coming to your district for X project.
Told by the speaker.
And so they had to, in order for them to deliver on the deal that was made during the regular session, they needed a special projects bill. Now, whether it was the governor, whether it was the lieutenant governor, whoever, that special projects bill was not included in the call, and it was pretty evident that the Senate wasn't going to pass one during the special session. I believe that inflamed Speaker White. I think it inflamed some members of Republican leadership in the House because they wanted to deliver on the promise that they had just made during the session. And so they came in. They rushed their way through the budget. They said, we're not answering questions about the budget. We're going to pass it, and we're going to get out of here. And they left. And I think that's really the real story of what we just saw.
Is that okay?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about deals being cut. Hey, vote for this, get this. Of course, we all know there are deals cut in politics left and right, in Congress, and the state capitol, and every capital in America. That's the wheeling and dealing of business, and that's how that's just how it's done. I mean, you're trying to go get enough votes. Well, I got to give you something in return. That's been that way for 200 years of American politics and probably 2,000 years of government and politics around the world. But I don't know anything about Jason White saying, hey, if you vote for HB1, that stoplight's coming to whatever city. But I do know this, and you know this, the House has always been a body, as long as I've been doing this, who's very pro projects, project bills. And why is that? Because there's 122 members in the House. It's harder for 122 members to play as important a role as a committee chairman, handling a major piece of legislation. And so you want to make sure you're doing something for your constituents. You want to make sure you're doing something, for your folks back home. One thing you can do is your voting record. That can really matter. But if you can bring something else home, that matters. And not that the Senate is any more or less in favor of projects, but it's been more traditional that the House has pushed that as a way to let everybody do something that's important to their district, as long as the money is there from the state coffers to be able to do that.
And we could have a special projects bill next year.
There's no question that we'll have a special projects bill next year. I mean, look, could they have done one this year? Yes, of course they had. If you just sort of go when the governor came out and said, hey, deal's done, I'm pretty sure my math is right here. I think we had about a $7.8 billion budget last year. We got the revenues in excess of that to have that this year. But it was really important to say, I want to control spending as much as I can. And so I think the budget was ultimately like $7.135 billion. So there's $500 or $600 million or more this year that they didn't spend. They already had probably $400, $500, $600 million in rainy day funds from previous years, which is good, saving money. So they're going to go in with excess of $1 billion plus interest earned. So there's no question they'll have money for special project bill next year, special project bills next year, whatever they think are the most important thing to do. And of course, for those who are listening, these are mostly, infrastructure projects, sewer and water, streets, bridges, traffic lights, things that courthouse repairs because it got damaged by a storm, things that matter, money that goes to our colleges, and those are all very important. But they made the decision. The three leaders ultimately made the decision. Brandon, we're gonna spend as little money as we possibly can this year, and keep government going at what they view as an efficient way. Hold as much back for next year, and we can make decisions next year when we get to next year.
I doubt this had a whole lot to do with legislative principles or concepts of budgeting. I just doubt that. I mean, I understand why you'd say that, but I think that this had a lot more to do with emotions.
Brandon, you mentioned the Department of Health budget. Let's talk more specifically about the language that was considered to be problematic there, and the deal that was struck with the governor to line item veto it. Could you explain that to us and exactly why it was problematic?
So I'm leaning in here because I want people driving in their car to think about this for a minute. This is a $7 billion roughly bunch of money that we're sending all over the state. Back in the earlier regular session, whenever they were passing House Bill 1, which we just talked about, the Senate made a mistake, which was a millions and millions of dollar mistake. They thought they were sending over a counter proposal to the Republicans. It was more than the House thought they could ever get, and so they just accepted it and declared victory. That just happened. Like within the last, this is like weeks ago, this just happened. So now we get to a special session. And again, huge budget. They're in the middle of this big process. What they decide to do in the Department of Health budget is appropriate $1.9 million to Methodist Rehab. The reason they appropriated that is because there have been some changes in the way that hospitals are taxed, so that now they're having to pay a fair chunk of money in this hospital tax. Well, this $1.9 million amount apparently represented what Methodist Rehab would have owed. The problem with that is they didn't do it for the other hospitals, and making an appropriation of that kind violates federal government CMS's standards for how they evaluate and referee all this stuff. So what that means is you jeopardize the Medicaid money that we receive, the federal money that comes back to the state, based on what we pay in. You jeopardize at least that portion that's related to that. So about anywhere from, let's say, $900 million to a huge amount of money, which would be the full amount of money we get from the feds. Because let's keep in mind, they still fund 47% of the Mississippi budget. But then you also run the risk of getting fined, because whenever you violate CMS, rules in this way, the state can be fined. So So that's what happened, Wilson. They sent that over, and then they hit the door. And so the Senate was left saying, well, now hang on a minute. We can't really approve this, because if we do approve it, we're jeopardizing this other funding. We didn't do this for the other hospitals. But since they've left, all we can do is either approve this or reject it. And apparently they got some representation that the governor was going to veto it. But the other point I want to draw out here.
Veto that specific item.
Veto that specific item, which is a new tool in the toolbox here in Mississippi. I just want to pull that out, because if Democrats were in charge of this process and they had pulled that flub that the Senate did on House Bill 1, and then a few weeks later they had pulled this mess that would have cost the state perhaps $1 billion, upwards of $1 billion, this is all Republicans would be talking about. They say these are incompetent nuts that can't do their job, that can't get along. And then not only can they not get along, they let their emotions spill over. And then they, in an effort to get back at each other, they end up cutting the state's nose off to spite its face. So that's it. I just wanted to say that. Unbelievable. Two huge mistakes by this legislative body. So that's another reason why, Austin, I say that's not efficient. Like when you come in for a special session and you're here 2 hours and you hit the road and you drop this bomb on the other chamber, that's a lot of things, but that's no way to do business.
I don't know anything about the Methodist Rehab deal. I don't know anything about money going to Methodist Rehab. Clearly, you can't send this is called the hospital tax. It used to be called the bed tax. Every hospital in the state has to put up a certain amount of money. They write the check to the Division of Medicaid. Medicaid bundles all the money together. They send it to CMS in Washington, and CMS sends back more money. Okay, those monies come back into the MHAP program, which gets divided amongst the hospitals. It is extremely important for the growth and success of healthcare in Mississippi. I can't imagine that this was done just to try to help Methodist, because then there'd be 150 other hospitals going like, "Hey, what's up? Where's ours?" So I don't know the details of that, but that doesn't make any sense to me. Listen. But you know, Brandon, and it's why I've always gotten along with him, is because he does believe what he says, and I appreciate that. But let me go 100,000 foot here.
I'm
Wilson.
braced for the butt here.
No, let me go 100,000 foot. When you look at Mississippi right now, there's a hell of a lot of positive things going on there. Excuse my language, in our state. Okay, and I look at two really specific issues when you talk about education and economy. I'm looking at my piece of paper because I wanted to go look at this and make sure I'm stating this right. All the Mississippi's the butt of so many jokes, but when you go and you look at facts right now, this was a story that was from May 25th of this year, and of course these are all national test scores. Our fourth graders are first in the country for math and reading. Our eighth graders are fourth in the country for reading. Our low-income students outperform every other state. African-American students in Mississippi rank third nationally compared to their peers in the country. Our teachers, I wish I'd have written the stat down for teachers, obviously are getting paid more than they ever have. With the economy, and none of this is perfect, but it's sort of like big picture here with the economy. In 2024, in Q4, two stats. Mississippi's personal income in Q4 of 24 had the largest increase of any other state in the country. Our GDP, our real GDP, had the second largest increase. Billions of dollars have invested. What worries me on the flip side, just to be honest, is population growth. The population growth is not there yet. Do I think that's coming? I think these things hopefully are the pathway for our population. We gotta continue, particularly to invest in our low-income school districts. They need the most help. I'm so glad to see these two stats. We gotta continue to invest in the city of Jackson. The kid from Dallas, Texas, or Little Rock, Arkansas, that goes to Ole Miss or Millsaps or Southern or State or Jackson State, we need them to stay here. Okay, we need them to start a small business or go work for the hospital or engineering firm. But Jackson's got to be a cool place to live. Okay, or Hattiesburg or DeSoto County or wherever. But it's really Jackson, the big metro urban area. And I think, what we're doing for, getting rid of the state income tax, that will be hopefully that will be very intriguing and interesting and a magnet for large companies. But when you look at Mississippi, I think we're in the best shape of my lifetime.
So you're saying despite any messiness that happens at the legislature, the net result is good.
Messiness always happened at the legislature. It happened when Brandon was there. It happened before we were all born. It happened before our grandparents were born. That's just politics and legislature. Could it get better? Of course. Do we want it to get better? Of course. But with all of the messiness, I think Mississippi is in the best shape that it's been in my life. And I know I'm older than him. I'll say I'm older than you too, Wilson.
Look, that was a nice moment of zen, actually, because there was a lot in there that I like. I don't necessarily, Austin, know what it has to do with what these people just did here in state capitol, but I appreciate your point about some of these things, and I share many of those goals that you just outlined. But when we talk about the fiscal health of this state, the health of the state economy, and you mentioned a moment ago, we aren't growing as a state population-wise. We're losing people. We're one of the few states in the country that I think are now two censuses where we've gone backwards. That's tough.
Pretty stagnant at maybe probably best case.
People call it brain drain, other things, but I mean we're having a hard time keeping people here. But let's talk about the budget itself, because what better document do we have for knowing how healthy the legislative leaders think we are than the budget itself? This budget that they just passed is less than the amount of money they appropriated last year. Whenever the state economist called everybody in November, he said, hey, economy's slowing down. And as we talked about during the course of this session, you mentioned quarter four in 2024. Well, let's talk about 2025. It's rough. I mean, excuse me, as we've moved through this session, it's been rough. And we've seen a loss in state revenue. Now, what is irritating to some of us, you heard this from Senate and House Democrats, and you'll hear it from me now. You just heard throughout the year how strong we were, how great things are. Let's cut the taxes. Let's cut additional revenue. We've lost somewhere around $600 million based on the first round of tax cuts that were passed in 2022. Let's do more of that. Well, if you're so healthy and so good, why are we spending less money? You mentioned K through 12. I agree with you. We're appropriating less money to K through 12 this year than we did last year. Now, it's marginal.
I don't know that that's
but it's, according to the budget figures, but that's notable. So, it's like, guys, don't tell me how great we're doing and then start choking us out on all our different projects.
10 seconds. This was really the governor leading on this. This was the governor with his fiscal hawk hat on saying, listen, with this, I want us to control spending as much as we possibly can. And he had the opportunity to do that because he got to call the special session. He got to dictate the terms, to a certain standpoint. And a lot of that we already talked about was they didn't do a special projects bill, which is anywhere from 150 to $400 or $500 million that they didn't do this year. That's money they put in the bank. That's money that makes interest. That's money they probably more than likely spend next year.
And we're very delicately calling that the special projects bill. It's formerly been called Christmas tree bill. Some people call it pork barrel spending, but
lots of names.
A lot of little ornaments that were left off the Christmas tree this year.
Let's talk about next year. The special session. Excuse me. We don't know if there's going to be a special session next year. The regular session. Next year. Austin, you talked about Jackson revitalization. The lieutenant governor's talked about that as well. That's one of his priorities for next year. What else do you think will be among the priorities in the next legislative session?
School choice will be at the top of the table, for Republicans. The Senate's had a different position from the House and vice versa, and the governor.
Yeah, House Republicans, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. House Republicans, thank you. Yeah, House Republicans, thank you. And Senate Republicans have different positions on that. I think there'll be, a lot of conversation about school choice. Obviously infrastructure is always there at the top, but I think they're going to be looking for, we got a lot of excess cash, and what's the best way for us to spend this money that impacts Mississippi the best? Big things. We'll have a new mayor in Jackson, which I think will be a really good thing for Jackson. I think John Horn's probably going to win. Obviously, we're recording this.
This is Monday. The election will have been over by the time, so you and the audience already know the results.
And we've got special elections. We've got legislative special elections in DeSoto County and Forest County.
So some new members.
Could have some new members. Over in sort of the eastern part of the state too. So it'd be really interesting to watch those races because politics matters at the state capitol.
Brandon, what do you think will be on the agenda? What should be on the agenda next year?
I think we've been at this now a little over a decade. I've been beating the drum on Jackson investment since we've been here. There's no question. You got to have a good state capitol. And the state has a role to play in that. And I think Republicans need to come around on that, and this is a fine time to do it, and I hope they do. But, I've spent a lot of time today being critical of this process that we just went through. But now that I think about it and we think ahead to a 2026 regular session, maybe let's keep it going. 2 hours, the House comes in, see what they can do in 2 hours, and let them go home. After the session we just came out of, I'd be perfectly fine with House Republicans coming in, doing about 2 hours of work, going home. I think the state of Mississippi would be better off for it. So maybe we just have a very short session next year. They come in, do as much as they can in a couple hours, they hit the road. I think we'll all be better off.
That'd be a really short session.
That's not how they did it when you were there,
No, it's not.
Brandon. Yeah.
We were better, though.
When I was there.
What do you want me to tell you? I mean,
It's changed over the years, no doubt.
yeah, no, it has. I mean, just this budget process itself, we had partisan rancor because we had a very strong governor in Haley Barbour who revolutionized the way that office has been used in the state. We had a very strong speaker in Billy McCoy. We had Phil Bryant as lieutenant governor. These were all strong folks with all very strong positions. But, one thing that you always had was detailed budget documents. And, you can say what you want about Billy McCoy. I think he was a great speaker. And I think he accomplished a heck of a lot, whether it be in the area of transportation or education. But when you talk about the appropriations process, his chair, Johnny Stringer, and his chair of Ways and Means, Percy Watson, they would sit down with individual members and go over the budget in detail to the extent that they wanted it. If they wanted to have a 7-hour discussion on one budget item in the House, you had it. Now, people may not have liked where it ended. They might have voted against a particular budget. We had some Republicans who voted against community colleges. I don't know why they did it, but okay, they're right. But those folks who ran the budget process had spreadsheets on the table. You could pick them up anytime. You had hours-long dialogue about each budget and what went into it. You broke down the little component parts. And fast forward to today, when they passed the budget this year, members, Republicans included, were not allowed to ask questions about what was in the budget, and they were not allowed to set aside items to say, can we look at this more closely? So, it's always cute whenever folks like me get on here and say, well, we were better back then. But look, those are the facts. That was a better process we had before. This is a bad process.
It's our last at issue for the session, right?
Unless there's another special session that we don't know about in the future.
Lord help us.
Gentlemen, thank you, as always.
Thank you.
Always good to be with you. This has been a special edition of At Issue, discussing the Mississippi Legislature's 2025 special session. You can hear At Issue every Friday night at 6:30 during the legislative session on MPB Think Radio. You can also subscribe to our At Issue podcast, which features extended versions of our roundtable discussions and featured interviews. And you can catch the video versions of our roundtable and interviews at mpbonline.org and on YouTube. At Issue is a production of Mississippi Public Broadcasting. I'm Wilson Stribling. From all of us here at MPB, we thank you for joining us.